Okay, I am so sorry for the technical delays that we've experienced, and we'll try to get right into it this time. So I'm here again, like yesterday, with Milo Rau, with the writer Edouard Louis, who is also an actor now. I forgot to mention that yesterday.
Absolutely.
And with the philosopher Geoffroy de Lagasnerie, and to discuss the aesthetics of resistance. So yesterday we discussed the roots of left-wing activism in your lives and whether all art is a form of activism. In a way. And we ended with some thoughts on the traditional separation between theory and arts, with Milo saying that to him, Edouard's books are also theoretical works. So Edouard, I think Milo was hoping that you would say a few words about that, about how you consider your own works in that sense and whether that resonates with you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much, Laura. The thing is, for me, the question is of course like blurring the traditional borders between art and theory and literature and everything. But the question is not exactly the question of theory. It's the question of explicit and explicitation. And yesterday we have been talking about confrontation as one of the cornerstone to kind of renew the artistic gesture and to kind of try to make art more radical. And I think that one of the other cornerstones of this revolution that we are hoping for and of this change would be not only confrontation but explicitation. And this is really what I'm trying to do in my books and what Geoffroy is doing since he's writing theory, and what also Milo is bringing, the new things that he's bringing also within the theater. I think that in the past, literature has been structured by the fact and the desire of saying not too many things, you know? And I had the impression that when I started to write, the less you would say in a book and the more you would be recognized, literary speaking and artistically speaking, you know, as if the best review you could get from a literary critique would be, this book is wonderful because it suggests everything and it says nothing, you know, it's not explicit, it's not didactic, it's not pornographic, it's just like everything is suggested and nothing is said. And we can like challenge and question this historical rule of literature. Why is it suddenly considered something positive within the literature to not speak? Where does it come from? And I think it's deeply linked to the interconnection between the bourgeoisie and the literature, because as we were saying yesterday, the bourgeoisie knows the world, the dominant class know the world, they know how bad the world is, they know how violent the world is, and they don't want to know it, you know? And so they prefer to suggest it in order to never be completely confronted to it, you know? So as if in the past there was an aesthetic values of not saying the things. There was an aesthetic values of creating metaphors and creating only suggestion. And when you read, for example, the journal, the diary of André Gide, it's incredible to read that André Gide wanted to say things, but in his diary always say, I shouldn't say it, I should just try to find a character that would evoke this idea, that would inspire this idea, but I would never see this idea. And I think what I'm trying to do now, and what also Milo in the artistic field is doing, and it's really related to theory and to what Geoffroy was saying about the explicit that contains theory, that theory contains, that a literature that would be radical today is a literature that would, or an art or a theater that would say what it says at the moment and in fact the whole history of the dominant class and the whole story of the bourgeoisie is to always hide reality as it is. You know, Pierre Bourdieu says that when the bourgeoisie eat, they create a ceremony in order to hide that they are eating for physiological reason. Where they put a coat, they always pretend that it's only for aesthetic reason and not to get hot and not to get cold. So you always have to hide, you know, the reality of the thing you are doing, and always like hiding the things that you are doing. And I think that to make an explicit art and to make an explicit literature, to say what you do at the moment you do it, it's fundamentally anti-bourgeois art, and from that regard, it's a radical art. If I want to say that my father was destroyed by a class system, I say it. I don't suggest it. If I say that Nicolas Sarkozy or Emmanuel Macron made political decisions that destroyed my father's body, I'm not going to suggest it in inventing a fake character, in inventing a fake politician. I say it. If I say that the world of my childhood was homophobic, I write it. I don't suggest it. I say in my books, the world of my childhood was homophobic, and he was willing to destroy people like me. And for me, this is really, something that is going on also in Milo theater. And I wonder how you think about it, Milo, and what is your views on it. But clearly, it's I think one of the things that we share, and that we share automatically with Geoffroy, because in a way, theory is the art of the explicit. So it's related.
Yeah, I perhaps I can shortly answer on it, or some thoughts I had on what you're telling me. So for me, the important thing, but I think that the neoliberal rhetorics or the bourgeois rhetorics of the non-explicit, of the trigger warnings, of the safe spaces, of this impossibility to go to an art space and look into the face of the reality of the violence of our economic global system. This is very typical for the whole bourgeois era, but especially, I think, for now, and the idea of purity in art. So I would state that what we are doing is somehow an art of the impure, using the power of the pureness of the radicality. But what we do as an act in the art field is impure. So my impression is the more you deny radicality in the rhetorics you use in the real world, so to say, somehow the more you create fictive worlds where nobody really is appearing, they are extremely violent. So, I mean, that's a bit the, let's say, dialectics of the emotions in the neoliberal age. And what for me is important that we link in arts the violence of the real and how we translate it explicitly into the space of or the parallel space of the unreal. So we had yesterday, 2 days ago, before yesterday, our common friend Thomas Ostermeier was here, and it was quite interesting because at one moment he was saying, we have to be in the rehearsal space, but we also have to be on the street. So now the artist has to be in both spaces. And it was translated in the press, because then it was an article about it, and they translated it, now we can't stay in the art space anymore, we have to be on the street. And I think it's exactly the parallelity of these two worlds, what it is all about, while being art. It's not denying the negativity of art by the positivity of activism, but bringing it together and talking about the difficulties of this crazy mix, what you do when you are kind of changing art by using reality to do so, and vice versa.
Now, I wanted to ask you about that, because that involves, of course, as you've done in the past, highlighting the lives of others, the real lives of others in your cases, whether it's through writing or on stage by highlighting what's happening behind the scenes and what the actors are going through. So how do you, as artists, how do you ensure that the people you're working with still have agency in that process?
Who should answer first?
Edouard, do you want to start? Perhaps writing about people, perhaps that you grew up with, and writing about them from a different position nowadays. I keep thinking about what Didier Ribon wrote about, writing about the working class when you're no longer part of it, in a sense, and that tension. How do you approach that and approach the agency of the people that you're writing about?
I mean, I'm not interested in agency. It's really, it's really not. I don't say that it doesn't exist or that there are no rooms in people's lives sometimes to achieve things. But when I write, what I find important and interesting is to see the situation where people's agency is being destroyed, and the possibility of dreaming, of choosing, of making decision is suddenly destroyed, being destroyed by a situation. And there is always a conservative risk for me in the rhetoric of agency, because if you say people always have agency, and if you say people always have room for choice, no matter the situation, then you make people responsible for what they are. What does it mean? It means that if a factory worker didn't study, it's his fault because he had agency and he didn't use it. I mean, if people are destroyed and depressed, they kind of chose it at some point because they had agency and they didn't use it. And for me, it was extremely.
Just to say, that is not what I meant.
No. Of course, I'm elaborating on what you say, but precisely, I think it's an important issue. I know it's not what you are saying, but I think it's I'm precisely thinking that when I published "Who Killed My Father" about the life of my father, growing up in a working class family with an alcoholic father. Stopping school at 14 years old, like his father and his father before him, going to work to the factory, then being destroyed by an accident at the factory, and being in bed for years, and being destroyed by French politics and the violence of French politics against poor people. There were some, and I know obviously that you are not part of it, but it's just like woke this inside me. It woke it up inside me. Mm-hmm. There were some like very bourgeois critics telling me he's denying the agency of his father. And for me, this reaction was extremely violent towards me and towards my father, because what does it mean? It means that if we say my father had agency, it means that he deserved what he got, that he didn't use this agency, that he didn't use this liberty. So I think that there are some lives that are radically destroyed in terms of agency. They are completely destroyed in terms of choice. And I don't think that it's the whole reality. I don't think it's everyone. I don't think it's everybody. But they are the lives I want to talk about. And I leave the bourgeoisie with the little agency, but and they can do whatever they want. But as soon as I write, I'm not into it. And it's strange because in the field of the left, some people pretend that it's more radical to pretend that people always have agency, you know, as if you were violent or conservative in saying that people have not. But what is violent is to pretend that people always have, and that they could have made a choice that they didn't make. And this is what I really want to understand. And that's why, like, I know that it's not what you were saying, but the word agency is completely outside my brain. It's outside my mind because it's.
No, that makes a lot of sense, but it's really interesting at the same time because someone's agency has been destroyed. I suppose there's that tension of you're in the position of writing about it and about them, about something that perhaps they can't write about themselves, and there is tension there, even if it's not necessarily tied to the issue of whether or not you're taking away their agency.
No, really, but also it's for me it's a good thing. It's a good thing that when you cannot speak, other people do it for you. And I was in the same position at some point of my life. There was some point in my life where I was hopeless, speechless, where I was a gay working class boy, and some people were talking on my behalf. And I wouldn't have been able to talk if they didn't talk for me at my place at some point. And that gave me the strength at some point to talk. So it's not, for me, it's never an abuse to write on behalf of someone. It's opening the possibility for the other people to talk. But it's a good thing that we have people who talk for us and in our place when we cannot talk. For me, it's the most beautiful thing. And so I don't,
Now, Geoffroy, I'd love to have your reaction, perhaps, because you've also worked with activists by writing books with them, with Assa Traoré, for instance. How does that come into your work, the idea of perhaps working with someone else and helping them get to the platform that they want to achieve, or at least further their platform by working with them?
mean, it's true, like Edouard, I don't recognize myself into the category of agency or even in the notion of give people a voice or represent the voice of the voiceless and so on. I think that when we engage in a theoretical project, precisely me, when I write, it's to fight or to fight against the pre-constructed discourse people use to understand themselves. So when, for example, I wrote about Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden said he was a patriot or said he was in the tradition of civil disobedience. And I wrote my book about him and Julian Assange and Sarah Harrison and Chelsea Manning. I try to show precisely how they were in another position than another situation that of civil disobedience. They are inscribed in other political traditions. They try to invent a new way of doing politics. When Assa Traoré emerged in France as one of the most important voices today of the anti-racist and anti-police movement, sometimes she uses words of category that, like police brutality, like discrimination and so on, that I thought were problematic if we want to understand the reality of the racial and police system in France and in the US. And so I think that the role of the theoretician is not to give a voice, it's precisely to deconstruct all the categories we use spontaneously to understand ourselves. But these categories are part of the system that produces us as subjectivity to the power. And so we think ourselves, but we are still thinking thought by the system when we use them. And so the role of the theoretician is to make a rupture with that kind of discourse in order to produce and to radicalize the way people think about their situation. Sometimes I tend to define myself as a radicalizator, to make people become more radical in their way of thinking, more systematic, more pure. And I was very struck by what Milo said about the notion of impurity, because I remember when I discussed with him or with artists, in fact, or with Thomas Ostermeyer, they always use the category of being not pure. Art is about being mixed, not too systematic, to understand the contradiction of life, to be in the side of it's not clear, it's complicated and so on. And it's true that, for example, in my work, I often precisely say that theory it's much more a quest for purity. You know, it's a kind of drive to try to destroy what we think as contradiction, what we think as impure, what we think as complicated, in order to recreate a coherence, you know, and to recreate the systematic aspect of life that we perceive spontaneously as impure or complicated, and so on and so forth. And so I think that sometimes this kind of it's not narcissistic, but it's a pleasure of impurity. For me, to be honest, I always see that as a way of stopping reflection, you know, because impurity is always for me a lack of systematic thinking, or being more in the of the realm of appearances than of the reality of the society. And that's why when you know, you speak about the issue from the rehearsal room to go to the street and so on. And I think it's very important. I had an idea listening to you. I said, it's very important to establish connection, of course, between art and politics. But what is most important now, it's perhaps the fact that politics become more and more an artistic practice. You know, it's not the fact that artists are more politically engaged, but more and more what we see is that activism is becoming a kind of artistic practice, or it's more and more about representation of what self acting and not real action. People go to the streets, they take photos, and they go back home, and so they don't really act politically, but they give an image of themselves as being actors of political change, and more and more perhaps the sphere of politics become a theater. You know, we speak of political actors, we speak of a political scene, you know, and our political action are kind of becoming more and more in the realm of spectacle, you know, of image, and less thought in terms of efficiency, of political efficiency. And that's why I think we have to make an opposition between art and politics to be politically effective.
I would like to to answer to this, but perhaps I was unclear in what I mean with not pure or impurity. I think purity, what you mean and what I mean with impurity is perhaps even the same. So we need the perspective of purity to see the antagonism, because I think what the question of agency, or let's say the actual neoliberal career of this term, is that we would create spaces, elitist spaces, where everybody has an agency and all antagonisms are exported to somewhere, to a kind of outside invisibility, you know, like child work. It's just like somewhere else. And in these safe spaces, there's agency for everybody. And I think this is the false purity, or that's the purity I actually attack. I want to create, perhaps you could call it, spaces of pure antagonism. So, so to say. So spaces, for example, and I think perhaps it's also a very different work we are doing, because you can, when you are working collectively on a play, for example, and this play is linked, all the roles are linked, as allegorical they might be, if it's Jesus or not, they are, for the people playing it, they are completely directly linked to themselves, and everything you talk about them, or you don't even say, is absent or too present or mixed, or you have this, all these conflicts are in the rehearsal room or on stage or on a film set, are totally present. It's not that I produce something and then sometimes later somebody would react. It's a kind of an ongoing process of dealing with these antagonisms, of exploitation, or of I don't know, different ideas how you want to model a history or your character, you want to be present in it. And for me, there's only one way out, and that's what we called yesterday solidarity, or it's perhaps more simply to put it, the history we want to tell together. And that we would give something away from ourselves to together tell this history, where we appear as a kind of a character. You know, perhaps you know the problem when somebody is doing television, is doing a documentary about you, or they send you an interview you made and they cut out like 80%. And then you try to find your argument in it, and somehow you accept the deal, that there is not complete truth, but you kind of and that's why for me theater is interesting, and why I try always to find a room of extreme impurity. That's why I would prefer the street to the rehearsal room somehow. Or I would try to bring the rehearsal room to the street and mix it together. What we do today evening, that was a project that was attacked so many times, because what we did is to bring together actors from Mosul and actors from Europe. And 90% of the discussions about this project is not what we achieved and what we did together, but it is that a white man is flying to Mosul. So this is the neoliberal discussion you have about projects of this, because I think all of us, and I include myself, grew up in a system of complete exploitation, where every discussion here, who talks more, how can we then use this discussion, I don't know, you know. We grew up in a system of exploitation that we can't imagine spaces that try to be non-exploitative. We just can't understand it anymore somehow. And I think art is a way, and now we are very pedagogic, saying that symbolic space is where you can be antagonistic, you can be extreme, you can include all differences you might have in your backstory, but at the same time finding a way of telling a story together. So that's the thing and it sounds very humanist, but I'm interested in it. To not exclude from the beginning on. For example, we have a lot of artist collectives in Germany, but these so-called collectives, they are people coming from the same milieu, having made the same school, and then they do theater together. And what do you expect as outcome from this? I mean, as a Marxist, not a lot, because it's just a repetition of the same. And I try to bring together, I don't know, in the projects, and it's very... it's very terrorizing and panicking sometimes, people that would never meet outside this frame of an art project.
I'm sure that's still a complex thing to handle when you're doing it in real time, say working in Mosul or with people who are in a completely different position in society or in the global world than you are. Have you ever had any ethical doubts or any regrets about the way you've handled some situations or some productions, perhaps Milo and then I will go back to Edouard and Geoffroy, or never.
I can be short. I mean, every second night is sleepless for me. I'm not a very ethical person from my character, but I'm confronted to so many contradictions that I'm really, and it goes to very simple things. We don't have to talk about different cultures. The time I have in, for example, the opera we made in Geneva, when the extras arrive, and then you have 20 minutes to say you walk from here to there. I mean, you have to organize sometimes, and it's a kind of a dictatorship of the art. And that's for me the most problematic. At the same time, strangely, also the most boring aspect of kind of making it round, reworking it. And this is for me the ethically most difficult moment when you want to make it legible for a third person that was not in the process, and you are very used as an artist, and others that are perhaps less used. That in the end you have to find this kind of form that is reductive, that is redundant, that is boring. So this is for me the biggest ethical thing. And of course, the only thing that you can do to fight against it, we will talk this evening about it, is kind of a real outcome. So for example, in Mosul, I hope we made an application for a UNESCO project that we will build up a film department there, that we bring infrastructure that then is independent, like we did it in the Congo Tribunal. Did you just like kind of somehow also sometimes try to really separate the artistic work and the activist work, if it's possible or not, but that you have these two lines?
Now, I suppose we're very much talking today about strategies for activism, and I wanted to ask you, Geoffroy, because you said yesterday that to you perhaps all art or writing is to an extent activism, not necessarily left-wing activism, but activism. But you also work very regularly with people whose career is in activism rather than in writing or in making art. So how does that relationship develop, and how do you find a balance when you work with people whose entire lives is devoted to activism and not necessarily to thinking about it and then writing or making art about it?
Well, it's because for me I don't know how to say that without being naive, but for me the goal of life is not to write books, but to change society. So if I write books, it's never to write books or to publish ideas or to be happy about a book or a good sentence and so on. It's at the end to try to find a way to give tools for people to fight better or to be more effective in order to change the laws or to change culture in which we live. So that's why it's true that, for example, for me, I don't have a lot of aesthetic practices. I don't go to museum. I don't really like paintings. I don't like sculpture. I don't go very often to the movie. I go often to the opera because Didier is a big fan of opera. I love Milo plays, and I go there very often because it's very different kind of experience. But it's true that for me, how to say, the definition of writing is to find connections with activists and people who fight or want to change societies. And that's why when it's very abstract, it's a way of finding a way to relate to them with other things that's just experience or indignation. And so the goal of life is to change society, and that's why my connection with activists is what is most important for me.
Edouard, do you feel the same at the moment? Say, when you start writing right now, if you start working on the new project, do you think about that dimension of activism at the same time? How do you position yourself as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I started as an activist. I became an activist when I was 14 years old. And I kept like being an activist. I was a Trotskyist activist in high school, and then I started to write my books.
Great.
I will tell you about it, Milo.
Yes, please.
And then I started to write, and it was a kind of a continuation of a certain of a way I couldn't bear the world that was surrounding me. Really, I was born with a kind of hate for this world and for its ugliness and for its violence. And so if we think in terms of a manifesto for a new art and for a new literature, we talked about confrontation, I tried to talk about explicitation, and maybe another cornerstone of it would be multiplicity, and the fact that when you write, as Thomas Ostermeyer was saying yesterday to Milo, you have to be also in the street, and you have to be also in contact with the social movements, and you have to be also like in so many different places. You can write in the newspapers, you can write your books, you can be in the street, you can do theater projects with other artists, you can go to high school to talk to younger people. And I think like as Geoffroy said, if the goal is to change the world, this change can be only achieved through this multiplicity of action. Because clearly when you write, you are not going to reach everybody. For me, it's an illusion I had in the past. I was always writing and think like, how could it be possible for the people of my childhood, the working class people, to read my book? And in a way, if we are realistic, they will never read my book because they are working class. If they start reading them, it's because they are not working class anymore. And because precisely our society works like in terms of exclusion of the people who have access to culture and the ones who don't have access to culture. So to think like, how can excluded people read is a contradiction, because if they have access to culture, then they're not excluded anymore. So of course there are like exceptions and like different people within a milieu, and you have like ways of sometimes reaching the people. But when I write, I don't try to write for the working class. I write for my enemies. I write for the bourgeoisie. I write in order to challenge them, to question them, to make them feel bad, to ask them, why don't you do more? Why don't you fight this world? Why are you reproducing this world? And then if I want to talk to working class people like my family or the people I grew up with, then I go in the street. Then I go to high schools and I talk to the people. Then I write in the media. Then I do short videos in the media or things like this. But if you want to really achieve a goal of change, you have to practice this multiplicity. Otherwise, you will just reach your enemies. And it's important to reach your enemies because they have the power, and you have to challenge them and eventually destroy their way of thinking and their way of being. But it doesn't, like, it's so many things at the same time, and it's not in just writing that you will do it. And that's why with Geoffroy we have been demonstrating, we have been writing with Assa Traoré, we have been demonstrating with a yellow vest, writing about it. Like it will not be achieved through a book, and it's not possible. But when you write a book, you have the possibility of doing all those things together. And for me, if you are a writer and you never go in the streets, it's a shame. It's a shame. It's impossible.
Now we've come upon conflict and antagonism in this conversation, and I feel like the horizon in all three of you is in a way a form of a new utopia, a new way of rebuilding from the left and from progressive politics. That the question being, how do you create a common aim or a common project that is going to override that sense of conflict, including on the left? We don't have much time left, but I was wondering if one of you wanted to perhaps say a few words about that question of the utopia, the goal.
Geoffroy, the last word is for you.
In 1 minute. Easy.
Yeah,
in 1 minute. For me, now, I don't believe in the notion of a common aim. I think that struggles are plural, and we have to find the singularity of every fight in order to achieve them and to radicalize them. And for me, more and more, I think that the left should be based on something what I call the vitalism, which is to say which are the forces that want to destroy life or to mutilate life or to end life of people precarious more than others. And we have to develop the forces of life, of health, of being in a good shape, not endangered, and so on. And so I would say that the multiplicity of struggles and a kind of vitalism could be the basis of the renewal of the left for me. I can explain that tomorrow if you. Yes. And I don't believe in the category of neoliberalism.
We'll have time. We'll have time to elaborate, and I apologize for the difficult question at the very last minute. Okay, but thank you so much for taking a crack at it. So we'll be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. to continue that discussion. And if you want to stick around, there is a very, I think, interesting discussion at 5 p.m. following our session about the question around the following question: can there be global arts, with the Brazilian choreographer Lia Rodriguez, the director Wajdi Mouawad, and the Lebanese playwright and visual artist Rabim Roué, and Orestes in Mosul, if I'm not mistaken, tonight at 7 p.m. since we've discussed it. Thank you so much for following along, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao, ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Avashti is already there.